Dad, I need to tell you something. Maverick's voice trembled as he stood in the doorway of my bedroom, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the hallway light. It was late, far later than he'd ever come to my room before. My heart skipped a beat, and I set down the book I'd been pretending to read. Maverick? What's wrong? I asked, my voice steady despite the unease pooling in my stomach. His face was pale, his eyes wide and searching, and I could see the tension in his shoulders as he stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. He hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. I don't know how to say this. I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I can't keep it to myself anymore. I gestured to the edge of the bed, my pulse quickening. Sit down. Take your time. He sank onto the mattress, his weight causing it to dip slightly. The air between us felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't quite name. I turned to face him, waiting, though every instinct screamed at me to fill the silence with comforting words. But I stayed quiet, letting him find his voice. Dad, he began, his gaze fixed on his hands. I've been feeling something I don't understand. It's not just admiration or respect. It's more than that. And I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. He looked up then, his eyes glossy with unshed tears. I think I'm in love with you. The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in around me. What the hell do I say to that? I stared at him, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. My first instinct was to shut it down, to tell him it was impossible, that he was confused. But the pain in his eyes stopped me. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't some fleeting crush. This was real, raw, and terrifying. Maverick, I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper, do you know what you're saying? He nodded, his jaw tightening. I do. And before you say it's just hormones or some phase, it's not. I've never felt this way about anyone. I know it's unconventional and I know it's probably wrong, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. How did we get here? My mind flashed back to the last few weeks, the way Maverick had been quieter, more introspective. The way he'd linger in the kitchen when I was cooking, stealing glances when he thought I wasn't looking. I chalked it up to him being a teenager, navigating the complexities of growing up. But this was something else entirely. I don't know what to say, I admitted, my voice strained. This is a lot to process. I know. His voice cracked, and he swallowed hard. I didn't want to tell you. I tried to push it down, to ignore it. But it's not going away. And I thought you should know. I reached out instinctively, my hand brushing against his. He flinched at first, but then he turned his palm to meet mine, our fingers intertwining. The warmth of his skin sent a jolt through me, and I pulled away quickly, as if burned. Maverick, I said, my tone firmer now. This isn't something we can just act on. You're my son. I'm your father. There are boundaries, lines we can't cross. I know that, he snapped, his frustration bubbling over. But I can't just turn off how I feel. And sometimes I think you feel it too. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Did I? I hadn't allowed myself to think about it, to examine the way my heart sped up when he was near, the way I found myself looking for excuses to be close to him. I'd buried those feelings deep, telling myself they were paternal, nothing more. But now, with his confession hanging in the air, I couldn't deny the truth. There was something there, something I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Maverick, I said, my voice trembling, you're young. You're still figuring things out. And I've been alone since your mom left. Maybe we're both just looking for something. Don't do that, he interrupted, his eyes blazing. Don't try to explain it away. I'm not a child, Dad. I know what I'm feeling. And I think you do too. I let out a shaky breath, my resolve crumbling. I don't know what I feel, I admitted. But I do know this is dangerous. If we go down this road, there's no turning back. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my skin. Maybe we don't need to turn back. My chest tightened, my mind warring with my heart. This is wrong. This is so wrong. But the look in his eyes, the vulnerability and desperation, tore at something deep inside me. I reached up, my fingers brushing against his cheek, and he leaned into the touch, his eyes fluttering shut. Maverick, I whispered, my voice barely audible, this could destroy us. Or it could save us, he countered, his hand covering mine. I'm tired of pretending, Dad. Aren't you? I hesitated, my thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. But then, without thinking, I leaned in, my lips brushing against his in a kiss that was soft, hesitant, and achingly tender. For a moment, the world ceased to exist, and it was just the two of us, lost in the intensity of the moment. When I pulled away, his eyes were wide, his lips parted in shock. Dad. I didn't let him finish. Instead, I kissed him again, this time deeper, more urgent. My hand moved to the back of his neck, pulling him closer as our breath mingled, our hearts beating in sync. It was wrong, so wrong, but in that moment, it felt like the only thing that mattered. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, our foreheads resting together. What are we doing? I whispered, my voice hoarse. I don't know, he admitted, his hand cupping my face. but I don't want to stop. Neither did I. The room was heavy with silence, the weight of what we'd just done pressing down on us like a storm cloud. Maverick's hand still lingered on my cheek, his touch warm yet trembling, as if he was afraid I'd pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. The way he looked at me, those wide, searching eyes filled with a mix of fear and longing, was enough to make my chest tighten. I started, my voice shaky, but Maverick cut me off, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Don't say it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Don't say we should stop." "Not yet." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Stop. That word had been on the tip of my tongue, but it felt like a betrayal to even think it. How could I? When his touch, his closeness, felt so right, even as the rational part of my brain screamed that it was anything but. "Maverick," I began, my voice soft, trying to find the words that had been eluding me since the moment he'd walked into my room that night. What we're doing, it's not just complicated. It's dangerous. For both of us." He nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line, but his eyes never left mine. "I know," he said quietly, "but I can't help how I feel. I've tried to ignore it, to push it away, but it's just there. Like it's always been there, and I'm only just now letting myself see it." I couldn't look away from him. His honesty was raw, unfiltered, and it pulled at something deep inside me, something I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge until now. Feelings. Feelings I'd buried so far down that I'd convinced myself they didn't exist. But they did. They always had. "I don't know what this means," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to navigate this. Us." Maverick's hand slid down to my chest, resting just above my heart. "Maybe we don't have to figure it all out right now," he said, his tone gentle but insistent. "Maybe we just take it one step at a time. Together. Together." That word echoed in my mind, both comforting and terrifying at the same time. Could we really do this? Could we really navigate this uncharted territory without losing ourselves or each other in the process? I didn't have an answer. But as I looked into Maverick's eyes, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Slowly, I reached up and covered his hand with mine, pressing it firmer against my chest. "One step at a time," I repeated, my voice steadier now. "But we have to be careful. We can't let this, whatever this is, overshadow everything else. We're still father and son. That doesn't change." Maverick nodded, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, doubt, fear, that made my chest ache. "I know," he said quietly, "but what if it's more than that? What if it's always been more than that?" I didn't have an answer for that either. Instead, I pulled him closer, wrapping my arms around him in a way that felt both familiar and entirely new. He buried his face in my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck, and for a moment, we just held each other, neither of us willing to break the fragile peace we'd found. But peace never lasts. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the quiet, and we both froze. "Ava," I whispered, pulling back slightly. Maverick's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of panic in them. "She wasn't supposed to be back until tomorrow," he said, his voice tight with anxiety. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "We'll figure it out," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure him or myself. "Just stay here. I'll go talk to her." But Maverick grabbed my arm before I could move, his grip firm. "No," he said, his voice low but determined. "I'm not hiding. Not from this. From her." I hesitated, torn between the urge to protect him and the knowledge that he was right. We couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. "Not now." "Okay," I said finally, nodding. Together, we made our way downstairs, the tension between us palpable as the front door creaked open. Ava stood there, her hair slightly disheveled and her eyes tired but bright. "Hey," she said, smiling as she dropped her bag by the door. "I got an earlier flight. Thought I'd surprise you." "Surprise," I said weakly, forcing a smile as Maverick hovered just behind me. Ava's gaze flicked between us, her brow furrowing slightly as she took in the stillness of the room, the tension that seemed to hang in the air like a storm waiting to break. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her tone cautious. Maverick stepped forward before I could answer, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk," he said, his eyes meeting hers with a steadiness that surprised even me. Ava's expression shifted, her smile fading as she looked between us, her eyes narrowing slightly. "About what?" Maverick took a deep breath, his hand brushing against mine for just a moment before he let it fall to his side. "About everything," he said quietly. "About me. About Dad. About us." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, there was only silence, a silence so heavy it felt like it might crush us all. Ava's gaze flickered between us, her confusion deepening as the weight of Maverick's words hung in the air. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and unease. Maverick hesitated, his shoulders tensing as he glanced at me for reassurance. I wanted to step in, to shield him from the storm that was surely coming, but I knew this was his moment. He needed to be the one to say it. I have feelings for Dad, Maverick confessed, his voice trembling slightly, but steadying as he continued. And he has feelings for me too. Ava's face went pale, her hand instinctively flying to her mouth as if to stifle a gasp. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for some kind of explanation, some sign that this was all a terrible joke. But all I could do was meet her gaze, my own guilt and fear mirrored in her stunned expression. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Ryder, is this true?" I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. "It's complicated," I began, my voice wavering. "I didn't plan for this to happen. I never thought." "How could you?" she interrupted, her voice rising now, sharp and accusatory. "How could you let this happen? He's your son, Ryder." "I know that." I shot back, my own voice rising to match hers. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I haven't been tearing myself apart over this?" Maverick stepped forward, his hands raised as if to calm us both. "This isn't just on Dad," he said firmly. "I'm the one who came to him. I'm the one who started this. I know it's wrong. I know it's messed up, but I can't help how I feel." Ava shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. No, this isn't happening. This can't be happening." She turned away from us, pacing the room as if trying to escape the reality of what she just heard. I wanted to reach out to her, to try to explain, but every word felt inadequate, every explanation too hollow to matter. "Ava, please," I said, my voice softer now, pleading. "I know this is a lot to process, but we need to talk about this. We can't just pretend it didn't happen." She stopped pacing, her back still to us, her shoulders stiff. "Talk about it," she said, her voice bitter. "What is there to talk about, Ryder? You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. How am I supposed to just accept this?" Maverick's voice broke in, quiet but steady. "We're not asking you to accept it. We're just asking you to understand. This isn't something we chose. It's just what we feel." Ava turned to face us again, her tear-stained cheeks glistening in the dim light. "Do you even hear yourselves?" she said, her voice shaking. "This isn't just about feelings, Maverick. This is about boundaries, about right and wrong, about family." "I know," Maverick said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but it doesn't change how I feel. And I can't just turn it off." The room fell silent again, the tension so thick it felt suffocating. Ava sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands covering her face as she took a deep, shuddering breath. "I don't know what to do," she said finally, her voice muffled. "I don't know how to fix this." I stepped closer, kneeling in front of her so that our eyes were level. "We're not asking you to fix it," I said gently. "We're just asking you to try to understand, to give us a chance to figure this out." She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen, and for a moment, I thought she might yell, might scream, might throw something. But instead, she just stared at me, her expression a mix of hurt and disbelief. "You're my husband, Ryder," she said softly. "How could you do this to me? To us?" I felt the weight of her words like a punch to the gut, the guilt crushing me. "I didn't mean to hurt you," I said, my voice breaking. "I never wanted any of this. But I can't change how I feel." Ava looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I need time," she said finally. "I need time to think, to process this. I can't do this right now." I nodded, feeling a hollow ache in my chest. "Take all the time you need," I said quietly. She stood abruptly, her movement stiff and mechanical, and walked to the door without another word. Maverick and I watched her go, the sound of her footsteps echoing down the hallway before fading into silence. When she was gone, Maverick let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. "Well, that went about as badly as I expected," he said, his voice tinged with humor but his eyes filled with worry. "Yeah," I agreed, my own voice heavy with exhaustion. "But we knew this wasn't going to be easy." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Do you think she'll ever forgive us?" I sighed, reaching out to gently tilt his chin up so that he was looking at me. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we'll figure it out. Together." He gave me a small, hesitant smile, his eyes searching mine for reassurance. "Together," he repeated softly. We stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between us, before Maverick finally spoke again. "What do we do now?" I hesitated, my mind racing. "Now," I began slowly, "we wait. And we see what happens next." Maverick nodded, his expression thoughtful as he leaned into me, his head resting against my chest. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close as we stood there, clinging to each other in the quiet of the room. The future was uncertain, and the road ahead was fraught with challenges, but in that moment, all that mattered was the warmth of his body against mine, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and the undeniable connection that bound us together. And then, just as I was about to speak, the sound of the front door opening again broke the silence. Maverick froze, pulling away slightly as we both turned toward the door, our hearts pounding. "Do you think she's back?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't answer, my own breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and then suddenly, a voice called out from the hallway. Ryder? Maverick? Where are you? It wasn't Ava. It was someone else. The voice sent a chill down my spine, one that I couldn't quite place. Maverick's eyes met mine, wide and searching, as if he were looking to me for answers I didn't have. The sound of footsteps grew closer, the creak of the floorboards betraying the intruder's approach. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and something else, something I wasn't ready to name. Who is that? Maverick mouthed silently, his body tense as he leaned closer to me. I shook my head, my mind racing. It wasn't Ava, that much was certain. The voice had been deep, unfamiliar, and yet there was something about it that felt intentional. Like whoever it was knew exactly what they were walking into. Hello. The voice called again, this time closer. I could hear the faint rustle of clothing, the shift of weight as whoever it was paused just outside the door. Maverick's hand found mine, his fingers trembling as they interlaced with my own. The touch sent a jolt through me, a reminder of the fragile thread that connected us now. I squeezed his hand tightly, a silent reassurance that we were in this together. But even as I did, a part of me wondered if I was lying to both of us. Could I really protect him from whatever was coming? Could I even protect myself? The door slowly creaked open, and I felt Maverick stiffen beside me. My eyes locked onto the figure standing in the doorway, their features obscured by the dim light of the hallway. They stepped forward, their silhouette tall and imposing, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Do you know them? Maverick's whisper was barely audible, but I shook my head again. I didn't recognize this person, and yet there was something about their presence that felt calculated, like they had been waiting for this moment. Ryder, the figure said, their voice low and measured. It's been a long time. I frowned, confusion clouding my thoughts. A long time? Who was this person, and what did they want from us? Maverick's grip on my hand tightened, his fear palpable as he pressed closer to me. I could feel the rapid rise and fall of his chest against my side, his breath warm and uneven. Who are you? I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. The figure stepped further into the room, the light from the hallway casting shadows across their face. I still couldn't make out their features, but there was something in their eyes, something that made my skin crawl. You don't remember me? They asked, their tone almost mocking. I'm hurt, Ryder. Truly. Maverick let out a soft, nervous laugh, but it was quickly silenced as the figure turned their gaze on him. And you must be Maverick, they said, their voice dripping with a strange kind of curiosity. I've heard so much about you. How? Maverick mouthed silently, his eyes darting to me for answers I couldn't give. I didn't know this person. I didn't understand how they knew us, or what they wanted. But I could feel the tension in the air thickening, the weight of their presence pressing down on us. What do you want? I asked again, my voice firmer this time. The figure tilted their head, a slow, deliberate motion that sent a shiver down my spine. I'm here to talk, they said, their voice smooth and almost too calm. About you. About Maverick. About everything. Maverick's hand slipped from mine, and I felt a pang of loss as he took a step back. His eyes were wide, his face pale as he stared at the figure. Everything. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. We don't have anything to talk about, I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at the edges of my mind. The figure chuckled, a low, dark sound that made my stomach twist. Don't you? They asked, their tone taunting. You've been keeping secrets, Ryder. Secrets that have consequences. Secrets. The word echoed in my mind, each syllable driving the knife deeper. Were they talking about me and Maverick? Had someone found out? My heart raced, my mind spinning with possibilities. What are you talking about? Maverick asked, his voice trembling as he spoke for the first time. The figure turned to him, their gaze piercing. You know exactly what I'm talking about, they said, their voice soft but with an edge that sent a chill through the room. You've been playing a dangerous game, Maverick, and now it's time to face the consequences. Maverick's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. I could see the fear in his expression, the way his body seemed to shrink under the weight of the figure's words. I stepped forward, positioning myself between them and Maverick, my instincts screaming to protect him. Leave him alone, I said, my voice low and laced with a warning I hoped they would heed. The figure smirked, a cold, calculating expression that made my skin crawl. Or what? They asked, their tone challenging. What are you going to do, Ryder? Protect him? You're the one who's put him in this position. Their words hit me like a punch to the gut, the truth of them cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. I had put Maverick in this position. I had been the one to let things go too far. Guilt washed over me, a heavy, suffocating weight that threatened to pull me under. Leave us alone, I said again, my voice weaker this time. The figure took another step forward, their presence looming over us like a storm cloud ready to burst. I'm afraid it's not that simple, they said, their voice cold and unyielding. You've made your choices, Ryder. And now it's time to face the consequences. Maverick's hand found mine again, his fingers trembling as he clung to me. I could feel the fear radiating off him, the way his body seemed to lean into mine for protection. I wanted to shield him, to keep him safe from whatever this person wanted, but I didn't know how. What do you want from us? Maverick asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure turned to him, their expression unreadable. Answers, they said simply. And maybe a little justice. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Justice. What did that mean? What were they going to do? My mind raced, 1,000 scenarios playing out in my head, each one more terrifying than the last. We're not giving you anything, I said, my voice firm despite the fear coursing through me. The figure chuckled again, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. We'll see about that, they said, their tone dripping with a menace that made my stomach twist. And then, before I could respond, the figure turned and walked out of the room, their footsteps echoing down the hallway until they faded into silence. Maverick and I were left standing there, the weight of their words pressing down on us like a suffocating blanket. What just happened? Maverick's voice was barely audible, his expression one of confusion and fear. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what had just happened or what was going to happen next. I don't know, I admitted, my voice trembling as I pulled Maverick closer to me. But whatever it is, we'll face it together. Maverick